All right, hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. Currently, we are in chapter Matthew chapter 19. Now, as I said in the last video, I'm going to take a little liberty, and I'm going to deal just a little about deal with marriage and divorce. Um, the Pharisees asked Jesus, um, "Is it lawful to divorce your wife for any reason?" Now, I think Mark's gospel is going to have a better take on this, but as I said, I want to deal with this because um, we don't get a chance to do this as often, and so hmm, So I'm gonna I want to deal with this and kind of deal with this question about divorce and remarriage. And so when you understand that divorce and remarriage, now um we can even deal with why so many Christians get remarried. I mean divorce and then remarriage. And I guess I'm kind of shocked that so many Christians out there that are divorcing and remarriage as if it is no big deal. So first of all, let me bring up the scripture so we can get right into it though. Let's do that. Um, as I said, this is going to I'm going to say be shocking to some because if you one of the problems too, because as you can see, I'm deliberating. Hold on, I'm deliberating as to choosing my words because I know this is going to affect a lot of people. But let me just say this, that we have to start with the scriptures. That's our starting point. What does God's word say? Not circumstances, not um, situations. A lot of people will try to say that their situations are exceptions or at least to be considered. Uh, there was a person that I knew that I would even say I consider very dear to me that got married and then divorced. And then they got remarried. Now, what's interesting, I think the first time that their wife kind of strayed from the faith, it's kind of living out there, and that sort of kind of the reason or his justification for divorce. What makes this situation so interesting was his second wife is a very godly woman. Now, as if this was a Hollywood movie with plot twists, twists. You ever watch a good movie, you will see, the plot, and then they have a twist, and then they may throw another twist at the end. And this one has one. Because he was trying to explain to me why he felt, or I guess plead his case. And he knew the scriptures. And then the plot twist to this was that his first wife, came back to the Lord. And I remember saying, I said, well, it's kind of funny because then had you been patient, she would have came back to the Lord. So now what do you do? And by the way, that was kind of his questions. So there are so many kind of circumstances, and I want, that's why I say I want to just take it. Just I'm not gonna be an in-depth series, but I want to, again, I do want to explore this to say, well, okay, as bad as it could be, we still have to kind of go back and at least start with the scriptures. Okay, start with the scriptures. All right, so let's go back. All right, so I'm going to read verse 1 again. I'm going to start with verse 1 again. It says, "And when Jesus had finished his instructions, he departed to Galilee and went into the region of Judea across the Jordan. Large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. Some of the Pharisees approached him to test him, and they asked, 'Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife on any grounds?' Now, of course, the Pharisees already know the answer. Notice they were testing him. They were trying to trip him up. They were trying to get him to say the wrong thing so that they would have cause to try him and get rid of him. So verse 4 says, "Haven't you read," he replied, "that he who created them in the beginning made them male and female? He also said, 'For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two will become one flesh.' So they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate." Okay? Now so when we look at from the biblical narrative, you start with marriage. So in the intent of God for marriage. So you start off with Adam and Eve before the fall, and you see this is what Jesus is expounding on right here. That in the beginning God made them male and female, one man, one male, and he joins one male to one female, right? And the two become one flesh. Now, verse 7 then says, "Why then," they asked him, "did Moses command us to give divorce papers and send her away?" Well, again, they're being kind of coy because, again, but they're not being, they're not asking honestly, okay? Because they already know the answer, right? They already know the answer. Verse 8, he told them, "Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because of the hardness of your heart, but it was not like that from the beginning." So again, he goes back to God's original plan for marriage. So when we look at, we can call this progressive revelation. You start off with God joining Adam and Eve together. That's the model for marriage. And then we see the fall happens. Man falls into sin. So now we see this hardness of heart. So now as you come along with this hardness of heart, because of the sin nature being dead in sin, excuse me, right? Being dead in sin. So then Moses give one precept, right? One clause, as it were, for divorce in the case of sexual immorality. And that's because, again, the hardness of the heart. And we'll get to that in a moment, later. But the hardness of heart. So you start with God's original plan, and then you see one exception, which would be adultery. So in other words, under God's plan, there was no reason, there was no viable excuse or reason for divorce until we get to the law. And then when we get to the law, Moses, because of the hardness of their heart, says you can divorce in the case and only in the case of adultery. Okay, but notice that was because of the hardness of your heart. Now, then we come along. So then, where is it? Jesus says here, verse 9, "And I tell you, whoever divorces his wife except for sexual immorality and marries another commits adultery. Now, there was another reason. Okay, there was another reason for divorce under the Old Testament law. And let's see if I can find this right quick, because I forgot about this too. I think I want Ezra. Let me see here. I think I want Ezra chapter 9. Let's see. Ezra chapter 9. All right. All right. Let me go to Ezra chapter 9. Okay. Let's see. Ezra. All right. Now look at this. Ezra chapter 9. It says, after these things have been done, the leaders approached me and said, the people of Israel, the priests, and the Levites have not separated themselves from the surrounding peoples whose detestable practices are like those of the Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites, Amorites, Moabites, Egyptians, and the Amorites. Okay. He says, indeed, the Israel men have taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves and their sons, so that the holy seed has been mixed with the surrounding peoples. And the leaders and officials have taken the lead in this unfaithfulness. And when I heard this, I told my report. Now, let me skip down. So here is the problem here. We start off with God, Adam and Eve, one man, one woman joined together as one flesh. Then the fall happened. Then Israel comes along. You have the law of Moses for Israel. The law of Moses was not for the Gentiles. It was for Israel. And then God says to them, you cannot marry outside of the nation. That's also a part of the law. You cannot marry outside of the nation. The exception to that was that if someone, a non-Jew, was to proselyte or for lack of a better term, come to faith of Israel. In other words, they like Ruth, okay, like Rahab. So if they embraced the God of Israel, they could live among the people. They could live as an Israelite, which means they could marry an Israelite. So to the point where in the bloodline of Jesus, we see 3 non-Jewish women in the bloodline of Jesus: Tamar, Ruth, and Rahab. Okay. But other than that, to marry outside, God would not recognize that marriage. So in other words, even though adultery in this respect is not the sin was marrying a non-Jew and especially a pagan. So watch this. When they married, this is why Ezra, actually, if you can read the whole story, but not, he went nuts. Okay. And then let's see. So I'm gonna go to chapter 10 and watch this resolution of them. While as you prayed and confessed, weeping and falling down before the house of God, an extremely large assembly of Israelites men and women and children gathered around him. The people also wept bitterly. Then Shechaniah, son of Jehiel, the Emlite, responded to Ezra, we have been unfaithful to our God by marrying foreign women from the surrounding peoples. But there is still hope for Israel in spite of this. Let us therefore make a covenant before our God to send away all foreign wives and their children, according to the counsel of my Lord, and those who tremble at the command of our God. Let it be done according to the law. Okay? And he said, get up for this matter. It's your responsibility, and we support you. Be strong, take action like men. Okay? So now he gives all of the actually list of men as who these are all the lists of the men who married foreign women. But I want you to look at the very last verse, verse 44, and it says, all of these had married foreign women, and some of the wives had given birth to children. Now that's the unfortunate consequences of the sin here. All right. Now, so in this case, the divorce that was sanctioned by God was because God never recognized their marriage. God never recognized their marriage. So there was actually two reasons you could say that God did not recognize a marriage. That a what we call holy matrimony, a joining them together. There are two reasons. And then one, we could see, look at verse 9. He says, and I tell you that whoever divorces his wife, except for sexual immorality, and marries another commits adultery. So the first reason, the question that was asked Jesus, can we divorce for any reason? The answer is no. If you do that, your marriage is not recognized by God. So other than adultery, your marriage is not recognized by God. The other reason was if they married pagan women. God did not recognize that because the nation of Israel was raised up to be a holy people or separated people for the purpose, as he said right there, not to mix the holy seed, not to commingle. And part of the reason is that God wanted Israel nation. By the way, this is not racial too. What we see here in Ezra has nothing to do with race, as some Christians doing slavery and Jim Crow tried to teach that God wanted the races separated. That they're just racist. These Christians who were teaching that's just a racist, you know. And there are many Christians that still think the same way, from this racist point of view, which puts me in the question of their Christianity. But okay, he wasn't talking about race, because again, you see that Ruth, who was a Moabite of all people, married Boaz, that later became the great great grandmother of Jesus. I mean, I'm sorry, of David, and then ultimately in the bloodline of Jesus. Same thing with Ruth, who was a prostitute, a pagan prostitute. But remember, she embraced the God of Israel, thus that was acceptable under the law. So it had nothing to do with ethnicity or race. And when I say that there are people out there that actually believe that even in 2025, that the races should not mix, okay, they have bigger problems. One, they have problems with Jesus themselves. They're like Pharisees, but I digress. Okay, so um, when we have this situation here, all right, so when you start off with God's intent in creation, one man, one woman, okay, joined together. And of course, all of these other variations that you see are always the result of the sinful nature. They're the result of the sinful, the result of sin and the result of curse. So you can go all of this. You got people that's been married 3, 4, 5 times. Okay, 3 or 4, 5 times. And the question is that does God recognize that marriage? And I'll say this, I won't go back to the scriptures, but in John chapter 4, when Jesus went, they went to this town of Samaria. And the Samaritans, by the way, during this time that we read in Ezra, when you had right before the 70-year exile, the northern kingdoms fell first. And after the northern kingdoms, you had the northern kingdoms, which was 10 tribes, and then you had the southern kingdoms, which was 2 tribes, Judah and I think Benjamin. Judah and Benjamin, I think. And the northern tribes fell first, okay? And when the Assyrians conquered the northern tribes and deported them, they also brought people in. And then later, those people that were mixed became Samaritans up in the northern tribes. And that's why the Jews hated them. And that's why when Jesus came to the Samaritan woman, and he asked her for a drink. She go, well, how did a Jew ask a Samaritan for water? Because they didn't. The Jews treated them as half breeds. They did not want anything to do with them. And the idea was that they were very much half Jewish, so they had every, they just. But at any rate, when Jesus said to her, he began to expound, and she saw that he was a prophet. She says, "Man, you must be a prophet." And at the end of the conversation, he said, "Go call your husband." He said, and no, yeah, he said, "Go call your husband." I'm trying to think how this went. She was gonna go and call her husband, and then at any rate, Jesus said to her, "You've been married 5 times, and the one that you're with now is not your husband." Right? So she'd been married 5 times. Guess what? And the one who she was with is not her husband. So the question comes down then, does God recognize your marriage? Does God recognize, you know, let's say your second marriage, your third marriage, your fourth marriage? And anything other than death, like for example, if your husband or your spouse dies, that's what breaks the marriage bond. Okay. So, and unfortunately, you could have a situation where, yeah, several husbands or several spouses die. Okay. Um, but other than that, these other reasons that people concoct for uh, for getting married. I'm going to get into next time the idea of the hardness of the heart, because you start off with God's intent, and this is what Jesus, remember, this is what he pointed to. And if you don't have a hard heart, wouldn't you not now say, well, Jesus, I'm interested in what Jesus was saying here? So you have the original intent of God's creation, and then we have the sinful nature, and even under the law, for the hardness of the heart, one precept was given, and that was adultery. So now we have another scenario that unfolded in time that I'm going to get into next time, and that is, what about the New Testament, the church? See, Ezra's situation was very easy. The Jews were never supposed to mingle with non-Jewish people. The problem when we come to the New Testament is the gospel is global. And so now the situation is when people are now married and they become believers. One becomes a believer and then the other one becomes a believer. I'm sorry, not a believer. So how does that situation unfold? For example, how does divorce, or how does divorce, um, uh, what is the precepts for divorce in that situation? where uh, one person is a Christian and another one is not a Christian. And that might have happened because one got saved. And then how does God even look at that in terms of marriage? But we're going to see in the next study. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome, and I'll see you in the next study.